So the do now for this lesson tells us that the two triangles are congruent and is asking for the corresponding congruent angle to SRQ. So if you look at SRQ, it's going to be this angle right here, which is marked with 2 angle marks. Therefore, you look at the corresponding angle in the congruent triangle, which is going to be SRF. Right? The reason why I started with S, and not F is because S must be congruent to S, R is congruent to R, and Q is congruent to F. So if you look here, right, you have to use the tick marks to make sure you're labeling them correctly. How would you prove the following two triangles were congruent? So you're given that there are two sides and you need to use your definition of vertical angles. So you would have side, angle, side. If you wanted to prove these two were congruent by side, angle, side, you know that a side and an angle are already congruent. Therefore, you would need these two to be congruent as well. How could you have done that? Say that G is the midpoint, HF is a bisector, and either of those would work. So now we're going to do some more practice. So we are given BA is congruent to ED. So I marked that right away. We know we have two congruent sides. C is the midpoint of both BE and AD. So because C is the midpoint of both, I know that I have two sets of congruent sides. So right away I can see that I know that all three sides are congruent. So I'm going to use side, side, side. So we start writing it out. Write down my givens. You can write your givens in one statement or two. I personally prefer to write it in one just to keep the numbers shorter. So you start with your given information. Again, they break it up again. So you know that BC must be congruent to EC, excuse me. Those two are congruent by the definition of a midpoint, as is AC and DC. And then finally, because of that, you have three congruent sides. So by side, 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 the triangles are congruent. The next one, BC is congruent to DA. So you mark that right away. I have a set of congruent sides. You know that AC bisects BCD. So again, bisect is to split it into two congruent pieces. So I have a side, an angle, and if you look, there is a shared side, so I'm going to use reflexive as well and prove that these are congruent by side, angle, side. So again, start with your given information. Then I use my definition of a bisector to state that the two angles are congruent. Use the reflexive to state that AC is congruent to AC. So because of this, I have side, angle, side. So the triangles are congruent by side, angle, side. Number 3. All we're given is that C is the midpoint of BD and AE. Because C is the midpoint, I know that I have congruent sides here and congruent sides here. So I already have side and side. And if I look again, here is my vertical angles. So I'm going to have side, angle, side. Start with your given information. State the congruent sides based off the definition of a midpoint, which was given to us. State that you have vertical angles. State that those angles are congruent because vertical angles are congruent. And then finally, we have congruent triangles by side, angle, side. And that's all we got for this practice day.